Black Widow is finally being released to theaters this Friday. I'm excited to see it. And now it is time for my final ranking of the MCU Phase 3. Out of the 3 phases, this has so far been the best of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Going bigger, bringing in some interesting new characters, new directors, interesting styles, and continuing their plan to make sure to get to Infinity War and Endgame well. There are 11 films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I'm starting with number 10. You'll see why later. And just want to say, this list is all my opinion. If there is anything here you disagree with, that is fine. And I'm also interested to hear your ranking of Phase 3 in the comments below. And now, let's begin the ranking. At number 10 is one of the most divisive MCU movies, Captain Marvel. Now I think this is a decent, watchable MCU movie, but it is definitely in my bottom tier MCU ranking overall. For what I like, my 2 favorite characters in this movie by far are Nick Fury and Talos. I like seeing Nick Fury pre-Avengers and the Winter Soldier, and the CGI on Samuel L. Jackson looked pretty flawless for how he looked in the 90s, and Goose the Cat was really funny in this movie, and Talos was definitely my favorite character in this movie. I did think he was going to start off as a villain, but with the twist that the Skrulls were trying to find a home and they were actually good guys, I really liked how they handled that twist. For my issues, however, I don't think she's bad or miscast or a different actress could have played the role. But I'm not entirely sold on Brie Larson as Captain Marvel. Her performance had me yes at times, but also at times. When she's showing that funny, cool, and snarky attitude of Captain Marvel, she rocks in the role. When she's stoic and emotionless, whoever's idea was that, the script or Brie Larson, it didn't entirely work for me. I do want to give her another chance in the future, but her performance needs work. As for Ryan Fleck and Anna Boden, who directed independent movies before this, I'm not sure if they were the right directors for this movie. There wasn't really much of a style to this movie, and the action scenes were really the most memorable or exciting. And even the editing in the action scenes were a bit sloppy. Especially in a fight scene between Nick Fury and Talos, I couldn't really tell what was going on during that fight. And one more thing, how Nick Fury lost his eye in this movie was just so stupid. When Nick Fury took off his eye patch in The Winter Soldier, I was hoping for a serious, dramatic moment for how he lost his eye. And how they played that scene here for comedy, and Goose the Cat just scratched his eye, and it was just like, really? That's how Nick Fury lost his eye? Overall, not a bad MCU movie, but kind of forgettable to me. I do think there is room for improvement with a sequel next year to Marvel's. I'm interested to see what they do, but it's not really one of the MCU movies I go back and rewatch. At number 9 is another MCU movie I don't really rewatch that much, but I enjoyed this one more, Ant-Man and the Wasp. A good and entertaining sequel, but I like the first one more. The cast is still great. I still love Paul Rudd as Ant-Man and Evangeline Lilly as Hope becomes the Wasp in this movie. And I did like how the sequel explored more of the quantum realm. There were still some funny moments, especially with either Michael Douglas as Hank Pym, who is still great, and Michael Pena as Luis. For my issues, however, one villain I didn't really care for in this movie was Sonny Burch, played by Walton Goggins. I've seen this actor in great things like Tarantino movies, like in Django Unchained and The Hateful Eight. But here, his character felt so unnecessary, he didn't really need to be in this movie in my opinion. And as for Ghost, she's not bad, but she feels like a step down from Killmonger and Thanos. She wasn't really as memorable or as sympathetic as she could have been, although I do think she is a better villain than Yellowjacket. And I didn't think the sequel maintained the same simplicity that the first movie had. And I did feel like there was a lot going on in this film, with Scott under house arrest, Janet is stuck in a quantum realm, and also a cat and mouse chase of trying to get Hank's lab. I still enjoyed myself watching this movie. This was the type of MCU fun I needed after that quite depressing ending of Infinity War. And also, that mid-credit scene, through the snap, Scott is stuck in the quantum realm, Janet, Hope, and Hank have been turned to dust. It was just like, quite an ending right there. Definitely a good way to set up Endgame. And I'm looking forward to seeing Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania in February 2023. At number 8 is a good MCU movie, but not quite in my top 10, Doctor Strange. Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange is honestly one of the best castings in the MCU. He's funny, he nails the arrogance of the character and also the determination. He rocks in this role, and I can't wait to see more of him in Spider-Man No Way Home and the Multiverse of Madness next year. And a great supporting cast. I really like Chiwetel Ejiofor as Mordor, and I especially love Tilda Swinton as the Ancient One. She's strong, but also has that wise, likable, and compassionate side. And with Mordo switching sides at the end, I'm really interested to see where they take his character in the Multiverse of Madness. The visuals in this movie are absolutely fantastic. Especially when Doctor Strange first met the Ancient One. Wow, those visuals were insane. And honestly, I felt like this should have won the Oscar for visual effects over The Jungle Book, which still had amazing CGI, but I prefer these visual effects. In some ways, they did remind me of Inception and The Matrix. In the chase scene when Doctor Strange and Mordor were in New York, where the visuals started to become really creative and awesome. And now for my problems, another weak MCU villain. Caecilius is played by Mads Mikkelsen, who is a great actor. He is really good at playing villains like in Casino Royale. And he's going to play more villains in the future. He's going to be the new Grindelwald in Fantastic Beasts 3. Looking forward to seeing him in that. And also Indiana Jones 5. He does feel like another forgettable MCU villain, and I would prefer if they would show his backstory rather than told. I felt like he had some potential as a villain, but they really didn't do much with him. And there were some parts of Doctor Strange's training that did feel a bit rushed. I wanted to see a bit more of his training before he fully becomes Doctor Strange. Overall, a good and entertaining introduction to the character. I also feel like there is room for improvement with a sequel next year, especially that Sam Raimi is going to be directing and Scarlet Witch is going to be in it. I can't wait for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness next year. And out of the MCU movies coming out in 2022, that's my most anticipated. At number 7 is definitely the best Thor movie, Thor Ragnarok. While I liked the first movie and Thor the Dark World, while the first two Thor movies were mostly serious and had their comedic moments, this one decided to be a full-on comedy and it was so much fun. I'm really glad Taika Waititi, who came from an independent background before doing in this movie, like in Hunt for the Wilder People and What We Do in the Shadows, and his style and sense of humor worked perfectly for this movie. Really glad Chris Hemsworth was given this opportunity to be more charismatic and funny as Thor, and I also like seeing Thor more vulnerable in this film. He loses his hammer, he loses his father, and in the end he loses Asgard. In this movie he has to fight his sister Hela, who is a threat to Asgard. And I've read that 80% of this movie was improvised, and it shows. You can tell the cast is having a lot of fun with this film. Tom Hiddleston is still great as Loki. I still love Mark Ruffalo as the Hulk. Jeff Goldblum as the Grandmaster was so funny. I really like Tessa Thompson as Valkyrie. She has a great backstory and an entertaining character. The funniest character in this movie is Korg, voiced by the film's director. When is he going to get his Disney Plus series? I'd watch it. And that fight between Hulk and Thor was awesome. And the Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin is used twice in this movie. The second time they used it, that was also awesome. That scene right there dominated the first two movies. For my issues, however, while I really enjoyed Cate Blanchett in the role of Hela, she was funny, but also threatening, I do wish her motivations were stronger in this film. And Scourge was probably my least favorite character in this film. I did feel like Karl Urban was underused in this film, and his change from being a bad guy to being a good guy felt kind of abrupt to me, and I didn't really feel his destiny in the film. And I do wish Taika Waititi had a stronger balance of comedy moments and dramatic moments. Luckily, 2 years later, this is something I think he absolutely nailed in Jojo Rabbit. And if you haven't seen Jojo Rabbit, please watch that movie. It's amazing, one of the best films of 2019. I'm curious to see what Taika Waititi is going to do for Thor Love and Thunder. The Guardians of the Galaxy are going to be in it. Christian Bale is going to be the villain. Natalie Portman is back. It's the only thing I'm concerned about at the moment, but we'll see. Overall, Thor Ragnarok is still the best Thor movie and a blast. At number 6 is another MCU movie that came out in 2017, SpiderMan Homecoming. Right after I was sold on Tom Holland as Spider-Man in Captain America Civil War, I was excited for the solo movie. I thought it was a very entertaining solo movie and one of my favorite Spider-Man films. Tom Holland is just pitch perfect casting as Peter Parker / Spider-Man. He's funny, nails the charismatic, you do sympathize with him, he's likable. And in that scene after the Vulture escapes and he just gets crushed and he is screaming, asking for help, I felt so sorry for him there. And I really liked that this was also a coming of age film. Now Spider-Man really wants to prove himself as an Avenger and impress Tony Stark, his mentor. And Michael Keaton is amazing as the Vulture. Still one of the best MCU villains. I really liked him at first. They did a good job of introducing him, of why he is doing what he's doing. And then the twist happened when it was revealed he is the father of Peter's crush. And when he first opened the door, I was like, oh no. And that car scene afterwards, that was some good tension. Even if they're not the best in the MCU, there were still some good action scenes. Especially the scene in the Washington Monument and the ferry. Overall, I thought Spider-Man Homecoming was a great solo film for the MCU Spider-Man, and I had a blast with it. At number 5, if you ask me what I think the most underrated film in the MCU is, my answer, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now this is an MCU movie that has grown on me over the years. When I first saw it in 2017 in theaters, I thought, okay, that was good, I liked the first one more, 4 out of 5. But then a year later, I decided to give it a rewatch, and I started to like things more, my opinion started to change, and I love this movie. Granted, I do like the first one more, maybe it had that element of surprise how different it was for the MCU at the time, but I thought this was a great character-driven sequel that really took its time to develop these characters, make them more engaging, funny, and entertaining. And how it took two characters that I liked in the first movie and loved them even more here and made them more compelling, and really focused on the tension and sisterhood between Nebula and Gamora. But mostly, Yondu was my favorite character in this movie, surprisingly. And I thought Michael Rooker did an excellent job in this film. Yondu got a lot more to do, he got a lot more development. His sacrifice, followed by the funeral, that was one of the most saddest scenes in the MCU. And the cast is still on top of their game. Chris Pratt is still great as Star-Lord. Zoe Saldana is also really good as Gamora. Dave Bautista is so funny as Drax. Bradley Cooper is again awesome as Rocket Raccoon. Baby Groot is just so funny and adorable. I love him. And I also love the opening scene where he was dancing to Mr. Blue Sky. Another great soundtrack, Brandy, You're a Fine Girl, Wham Bam Sham, Come a Little Bit Closer, and that scene between Yondu, Rocket, Baby Groot getting their revenge. And another improvement, I thought Ego was a much better villain than Ronan. How he first started off as a likable father to Peter, but also turns out to be a villain and you do hate him. And the visuals on Ego the Living Planet are beautiful. One of the most visually amazing films in the MCU. Just so detailed, colorful, and beautiful to look at. For the problems, I don't really care about the gold people whenever they showed up. I didn't really care about their conflict between them and Rocket Raccoon who stole their batteries. And also, I do think the first movie was funnier. There were a few jokes that kind of missed in this film. Overall, I think Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is a great, satisfying, and underrated sequel that I started to love more and more. And I'm gonna say this was my second favorite comic book movie of 2017, with Logan still being the best. And with James Gunn, I am so excited to see what he's gonna do for the Suicide Squad in a month. I'm just so freaking excited. And I'm so happy that he's still gonna direct Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, set to come out May 2023. I am so excited for that. I can't imagine anyone else directing Volume 3 other than James Gunn. And let's hope there's a great trilogy for the Guardians of the Galaxy. At number 4 is another satisfying MCU sequel, Spider-Man Far From Home. I do think this is better than The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but I do think Spider-Man 2 is a better sequel, but still another great Spider-Man film. I really liked how this film continued the events after Endgame, people being affected by the blip, coming back 5 years later, and how Tony's sacrifice is kind of putting pressure on Peter as the next Iron Man. And even though he wants to take a break from being Spider-Man and doing superhero stuff, just want to have fun with his vacation and starting out feelings for MJ, I did sympathize with him there, and honestly, if I were in his shoes, I would want to take a break from being a superhero after fighting Thanos as well. But the actor stealing the show, Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio, was awesome. And seeing one of my favorite actors in an MCU movie was definitely a treat. Going in, I knew he was going to be the villain, but it wasn't really predictable in that he was going to be the villain. Just how he was going to be revealed, I was interested in seeing. And I could tell Jake Gyllenhaal was having so much fun in the role, and how he first starts off as a supportive new hero for Peter. But then it was revealed he was a former Stark employee who got fired by Tony Stark. He was the illusionist creating the elementals, and he is right now one of my top 5 favorite MCU villains. Thankfully, this had better action scenes than Homecoming that were more entertaining, better directed. I really liked all the action scenes involving the elementals. And quite possibly, my favorite scene in this movie was when Peter was seeing Mysterio's illusions. That scene, visually, was awesome. However, I do think Vulture is a stronger villain than Mysterio. I just bought his motivations more. Overall, I love Spider-Man Far From Home. I loved it more than Homecoming. And after that mid-credit scene, when Peter Parker's identity was revealed, I can't wait for Spider-Man No Way Home. At number 3 is the first comic book movie to get a Best Picture nomination, Black Panther. Now, do I think this film deserves a Best Picture nomination? Yes. I can tell it was probably because of the cultural impact this movie had, but do I think it should be the first comic book movie to get a Best Picture nomination? Honestly, I'm mixed on that. I'm happy that I did, yes, but I felt like there were other comic book movies that deserved the Best Picture nomination in the past, like Dark Knight or Logan. But I still think this is an excellent, top-tier MCU movie. I am still heartbroken that Chadwick Boseman sadly passed away last year, because I couldn't imagine anyone else playing Black Panther other than him. I like that T'Challa wasn't a perfect character in this movie. He had his obstacles. Not really sure of wanting to be king after his father died in the explosion caused by Zemo in Captain America Civil War. And also Killmonger arriving in Wakanda to challenge him. And speaking of Killmonger, he was my favorite MCU villain before Thanos. I like that he wasn't a typical generic supervillain, And he actually had an emotional backstory and you understood where he was coming from and made for a good threat to Wakanda. And great supporting characters. Shuri was really funny. Okoye was awesome, as well as M'Baku. Ryan Coogler did a great job making this movie, especially the world building of Wakanda, how grand it is, the technology, and the rituals. For my only issue, however, there were some noticeable CGI in the climax, especially when it came to the rhinos and the final fight scene between Black Panther and Killmonger. Still to this day, Black Panther is still one of my top 10 MCU movies. Fantastic. I am very curious to see what they're going to do for Black Panther 2 Wakanda Forever next year. And I'm glad they're not going to recast Chadwick Boseman. And they should focus on honoring his legacy, and if they want to make Shuri a new Black Panther, hopefully they'll make it an interesting enough story. At number 2, proves that Anthony and Joe Russo were the best directors in the MCU, Captain America Civil War. AKA Batman v Superman done right. How this film took so many characters and made such an organized, flowing, and engaging story. And each character, you do understand why they chose each side, and how it makes you think back to previous MCU movies. And with the conflict between Captain America and Iron Man, with Captain America, you do understand, okay, governments do have agendas, but also agendas change. Not really sure if you could trust the government in wanting to keep the Avengers in check. So I thought, okay, Team Cap. But then with Iron Man, some people did die while they were saving people. That there were some people who sadly died at the wrong place at the wrong time. So you do think, maybe he does have a point. And you do think, he is right, can't really choose, honestly. The excellent cast on the top of their game, from Chris Evans, Robert Downey Jr., Scarlett Johansson, Don Cheadle, Anthony Mackie, Sebastian Stan, Chadwick Boseman, Tom Holland, Paul Rudd, everyone terrific. And the airport battle is by far one of the best action scenes in the MCU. Exciting and intense, but also funny at the same time. And one of my favorite moments was Ant-Man's big scene. Amazing. The final battle between Bucky, Steve versus Tony was just heartbreaking. Now at first, Tony may join Steve and Bucky, but then discover something of what happened to his parents. Oh, that got really intense. Civil War is still to date not only one of my favorite MCU films, but one of my favorite superhero films of all time. And now, for my number 1 favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe film of Phase 3. This was a tough decision because I adore both movies. And before doing this list, I thought, should I do this? But then I decided, why not? My number 1 is both Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Now I rewatched both these movies and I think they both have done fantastic things. But equally, comparing them is like choosing between apples and oranges. And honestly, I felt like both were worthy of the number 1 spot. Let's start with Infinity War. By how much time that was built to Thanos being the main villain of this film, there were some excitement but also worries. Could he really be worth the wait? And worried that he was going to be another Steppenwolf from Justice League, another boring, bland, generic villain? Nope. He is the opposite of that. He is so menacing, quotable, and memorable, but also has depth to him, and you understand why he's doing what he's doing, and he thinks he's doing the right thing. And Thanos is by far the best MCU villain, and I'm just gonna say it, he is the Heath Ledger Joker of the MCU. This is such an action-packed movie at 2.5 hours, not one single boring moment. And how there is constant stakes throughout this movie. You're wondering how the Avengers are gonna survive and how they're gonna stop Thanos. Just wondering who could live, who could die. That film did a great job setting up Thanos at the beginning. This fight with the Hulk really shows how much of a threat he is. And the top-notch cast throughout from the heroes. Not one single bad performance, everyone was at the top of their game. And out of the heroes, the 2 standouts in this movie were Thor and Gamora. Thor continues to be more vulnerable and Chris Hemsworth did a great job. And I loved his interactions with the Guardians of the Galaxy. And also, how awesome was that axe? That axe is awesome. And I really liked how this film focused more on the adopted daughter relationship between Thanos and Gamora. And when Thanos killed Gamora, oh, the look on her face when he did it, that was heartbreaking. And the amazing and memorable musical score from Alan Silvestri. Honestly, Alan Silvestri's score for both movies is the best in Marvel Cinematic Universe. And that ending, when Thanos finally snapped his fingers, got all the Infinity Stones, and Thor couldn't aim for the head with the axe. Just no music, just the amount of shock during that scene as some characters are turned to dust. Now the different points of view from Wakanda and Titan. And another heartbreaking scene when Spider-Man said I don't want to go, oh. Tom Holland's acting was great in that scene. And I'll never forget just watching that ending in theaters, just being so shocked, and it was like, I want to see the next movie now. And now, Endgame. This was the big film in the Infinity Saga that all the films were building up to, and it was absolutely worth the wait, amount of time and planning that went into this. While Infinity War was more action-packed, this was more character-driven film, on how the remaining heroes are focusing on their loss and their defeat, and how they're trying to find a way to bring everyone back. And then this film later becomes an entertaining time travel story, and this film did need the 3-hour runtime. How much time has been focused for their planning, for the time travel, going back in time to get the Infinity Stones to build their new gauntlet. All that leading to that glorious, phenomenal, just gets me pumped up final battle, the portals, and also before that, Cap gets the whole Mjolnir or Thor's hammer. Just, I clapped in that moment in theaters. And all the heroes coming back, that portals, Cap saying Avengers Assemble, just and everyone in the cast does a fantastic job. Robert Downey Jr. gives his best performance as Iron Man. Same for Chris Evans as Captain America. And also Chris Hemsworth, Mark Ruffalo, Scarlett Johansson, Paul Rudd, Jeremy Renner. Everyone just gave their A+. And also Endgame took some interesting risks when it came to Hulk and Thor. I really liked what they did with Professor Hulk. How it was Bruce Banner both accepting Hulk and human form. And Fat Thor, honestly, I liked what they did with it. It had its funny moments, yes, but it was also really sad and heartbreaking. Given what Thor has been through in the past, he lost so many loved ones, he tried to stop Thanos but failed, and how people changed when it came to grief and PTSD. And Tony Stark's sacrifice was done beautifully. Just his final line being, "I am Iron Man," his final line in the first Iron Man, and his funeral scene. Multiple times I've watched this scene, I cry every time. And that camera panning to everyone Tony Stark has affected in the past, I also love that shot. And the music as well, just beautifully done. Great conclusion to Tony Stark and Steve Rogers. This was such a satisfying conclusion to the Infinity Saga. A masterpiece of a superhero movie that was so worth the wait and satisfying on every level. And one regret on my best of 2018 and 2019 list, I had Avengers Infinity War at number 5, and to update that 2018 list, my number 1 is Spider-Verse, second place would be Mission Impossible Fallout, and third place would be Infinity War. And now for my 2019 list, I also had this at number 5. To change that list, number 1 still 1917, and 2 Endgame. And to both Infinity War and Endgame, I love you 3000. And that was my final ranking of Phase 3 of the MCU. I enjoyed doing these ranking videos for the MCU. Black Widow out this Friday, the first film in Phase 4. I'm really excited to see what they do. And I can't wait to see Black Widow this Friday, hoping it's good. And I would like to hear your ranking of Phase 3 from your least favorite to your favorite. Let me know in the comments below. And also make sure to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe if you're new here. It really means a lot. I'm Jack Benner, and look forward to another movie review.